So a Gwini Ushla, hope you can hear me. Kamalesh. Yeah, thank you. Always good to have somebody down the back just giving me the thumbs up, just in case. You're all extraordinarily welcome to the Joe Lee Theatre of the National Library of Ireland on what's nothing short of a joyous occasion. I'm going to be short and sweet before I pass over the baton to Anna here. But before I do, I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to open such a special event and occasion here at the NLI, marking 10 years since that extraordinary day when Ireland said yes. And just in terms of the personal, I remember being heavily pregnant on my second child, who arrived on the 3rd of July, and just thanking God that we were in such a kind, equal society, and that no matter what he would, want to do or become in life, that he would be safe and respected. So for many of us, the memory is still fresh. The colour, the hope, the feeling that something profound had shifted and would never return. That day wasn't just a legal turning point, it was emotional, personal, and shared as a collective, as a community, as a nation. We are here tonight to celebrate that shared moment and to remember the work, the courage, and the campaign that brought us here, to recognise how important it is to preserve the story behind that moment for future generations and for posterity. Tonight is not just about looking back, it is about making sure what was hard won is never forgotten. I just want to make a note for Dr. Karl Hayden, who is the director of the National Library of the United States, the Library of Congress, who was sacked completely out of the blue last Thursday. So just to say that... So it is about something hard won never being forgotten. I'm also delighted to officially launch the photographic collection from the Yes Equality Campaign Digital Archive. This collection is over 1,000 photographs captured by photographer Paul Sharp. It's now live and fully accessible on the National Library of Ireland's catalogue. Paul documented the activities of the Marriage Equality Campaign, voting day and post-result celebrations that captured the personal stories and the spirit behind the campaign. The Yes Equality Campaign Digital Archive donation was one of the National Library of Ireland's first born digital pilot projects, and the photographic selection launched today is the first at the NLI to become fully accessible online, something we're deeply proud and privileged to provide. These photographs are part of the archive donated in 2020 by the organisation Yes Equality. This is the first fully born digital photographic archive we have made available online, and we are profoundly grateful to the donors of this archive. Photographer Paul Sharp, the co-leaders of Yes Equality, Grania Healy and Brian Sheehan, as well as former co-directors, and Karl Hayden, filmmaker and photographer. The story that they helped shape now belongs to the national collections residing in the National Library. The Yes Equality digital collection joins our already significant LGBTI plus holdings, most notably the Irish Queer Archive, which provides an absolutely fascinating insight into the social, cultural and political history of LGBTI plus communities in Ireland. This living archive continues to grow through generous donations from representative groups and individuals. As Ireland's official and unofficial memory keeper, the National Library is committed to capturing, protecting and sharing the country's diverse voices and experiences. As part of this, we collected, preserved and now provide access to the websites that formed part of the 2015 Marriage Equality Referendum campaign. Again, an immense privilege to do so. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the remarkable people whose contributions have made these collections possible who are with us here this evening. Bill Foley, who donated his late partner Christopher Robson's collection of thousands of photographs recording Pride marches from 1992 to 2007. Wheel of Wheels. This collection was the subject of our Living with Pride exhibition that was held at the NLI's National Photographic Archive in Temple Bar in 2021. We are also delighted to have collaborated with Jeremy O'Sullivan, who is here with us this evening, and the team at EU House, the European Parliament Liaison Office in Ireland, to host an exhibition of photographs by Paul Sharp. The images are drawn from our Yes Equality archive and will be on display at the Europa Gallery on Chatham Street here in Dublin too, from the 21st of May to the 4th of July. Well worth a visit. We are also grateful to former Minister and activist Catherine Sapone, who, for the Catherine Sapone, obviously, and Anne Louise Gilligan collection. Míle buíochas, Catherine. Having the absolute privilege of being involved in the mounting of Catherine Sapone and Anne Louise Gilligan's wedding dresses in Collins Barracks at the NMI, and it'll always stay with me. Also to Tony Walsh, founder of the Irish Queer Archive, and our former National Library of Ireland colleague and very dear friend, Elizabeth Kerwin, who recently retired after a long career at the National Library of Ireland. Weren't we very lucky? And was a driving force behind the Irish Queer Archive. Your work will reside here for posterity, Elizabeth, and everything that you did. And to those considering future donations, your story really matters. It belongs here in the national story in the NLI. I'd also like to acknowledge one of my predecessors as director, Sandra Collins, who initiated the S Equality donation, but also and particularly to the digital collections team, obviously headed up by Ona Carrigan, but Joanna Finnegan, Della Keating, and many others, Jenny Byrne, Kieran O'Leary, Leona Fearon. I see them all here, and I'm so sorry if I've forgotten anybody. Please forgive me. But for your rollout of this acquisition makes it all the more accessible in terms of giving access across Ireland and the world. To all the activists and politicians of all parties here tonight who support the National Library of Ireland's endeavours with these collections, thank you. Your support reinforces a fundamental truth. Our libraries must reflect everybody in society now more than ever. The collections we preserve and the stories we tell must represent all voices, especially those who are being marginalised or silenced in any shape or form. While we celebrate making this archive available on our catalogue for all to see, I want to acknowledge that we have much more important material to make available to the public. We recognise how essential this work is, and we will do our absolute utmost within our limited resources to continue it. Providing access to the Yes Equality Campaign Digital Visual Archive demonstrates the importance of investing in a thing that we call digital preservation. It shows how our evolving digital collecting and preservation practices ensure that digital material remains findable, accessible, and reusable in the future, protecting critical aspects of Ireland's contemporary story, because all contemporary becomes history. And once your history is protected, your nation is protected in terms of its full story, in terms of its civilization. We are especially proud to host this panel discussion tonight and hear from some of the key voices from the campaign. It's my great pleasure to hand over to tonight's chair, Anna Nolan, producer, activist and chairperson of the National LGBT Federation. And please note the fire exits. I'm forced to say that. I'm sorry, it's such a mundane but necessary thing under legislation. And photographs are being taken for the event, which will be used for publicity. Also forced to say that and give everybody a heads up. Thank you all for being here. And I very much look forward to the conversation ahead. But now over to the wonderful Anna Nolan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I'm just really struck talking about archive and photos. You know, we have been talking about going back 10 years, and our brains are full of photos and images and history and stories. And it's an emotional thing, actually, and it's true. That's why seeing these photos up on the screen and really, you know, taking note and valuing the archive is so important. So thank you for that and for inviting us here this evening. Welcome to Revisiting the Yes Equality Campaign. I'm delighted to be chairing this event. I think campaign is the key word here, and I've been having conversations with the panel, looking back talking about strategy, personal stories. And what I want to get across is the big stories as well as the small personal stories. I'm delighted to be joined by three incredible people. Brian Sheehan, who was co-director of Yes Equality at the time. We also have Anna MacCarthy, another Anna MacCarthy, who was an activist with LGBT Noise. That's some noise for you there, Anna. And we have Karl Hayden, filmmaker, photographer, and LGBTQI plus activist. I'm going to break this chat into 3 time periods. First of all, looking at 2013 to 2015, that 2-year period. Then the actual day itself, and then looking at now. And before the final part, we will have questions from the audience. And please ask questions or just make comments about how you're finding it all. I think it's great to hear from everybody out there. So, Brian, the Constitutional Convention gave the green light for the referendum. It was an incredible moment. And I'd like to ask you, what was happening for you at that time, and how did the campaign progress for you after that?
Thank you, Anna. Can I start with 3 other little things?
No.
You know me well. I actually want to thank you for that speech, Audrey. I think it was fantastic in an environment. Kamala Harris, and I said it the other day, Kamala Harris recently quoted someone else saying, "Courage is catching." I think in the environment in the world we live in, your bravery and courage and that kind of a stance is vital for us. Thank you. That's one thing. The second thing, I will be murdered if you don't realise that I'm here speaking for Branya, not for Brian. Right? So we're missing Grania Healy, who, funny enough, managed to be in Sardinia on a balcony having wine. But anyway, so I bring her greetings to you and a big, huge thank you. And the third thing, before I answer, I can't tell you the pleasure to be in a room with so many of the people who worked in a minuscule office in Clarendon Street for something we didn't know was possible. We were ridiculed by the political class, with respect to the political class here, and some respect. And they thought we were fools, basically. And I'll tell one story, and I will answer. Or shut me up. People thought we were daft, right? Grania and I were co-directing the referendum. Nobody thought we'd win. The political class weren't engaging because they thought, oh, there's Paul, because they thought they're amateurs, right? We had the miraculous intervention of Noel Whelan, God rest his soul, without whom the referendum would not have been won, but with any, I think we all understand that. And the media had us written off. One day, Harry McGee from the Irish Times was in Houston Station on his way to Mullingar or somewhere. So I don't mean to disparage Mullingar. I'm from West Clare. And he saw what had turned out to be Noel Sutton in the Dublin South Central Yes Equality group, standing there with the leaflet saying, "I'm voting yes. Can I tell you why, or ask me why," to the people who were passing by. And people took a leaflet, as they always, and then stopped, processed what Noel had said, and turned around and had a conversation. And Harry counted loads of people who did that, and he thought, oh, okay, there's something else going on. And what was going on was thousands and thousands of people around the country stood up for themselves, for their families, for their friends, and for total strangers, because that's the point. What we were fighting for was decency and generosity and inclusiveness and love and equality. And turns out we all want those values, we all espouse those values, we think they're inherent in Irish people somehow, and that's what we're standing up for. So it's all of those people I want to say thank you for, and I will now briefly answer you. One more shout. Civil partnership would come in 2010. It was a tricky time in LGBT land. But the thing, thank you. It doesn't matter, we won in the end. What courage is catching. Something like 2,500 or 3,000 people, I've forgotten the number, went out and had civil partnerships around the country. And building on the campaigns that Marriage Equality Would Have been out to your TD, these people on the front page of the Longford Leader, on the front page of the Clare Champion, on the front page of the Wexford Echo, and the Spartan Echo, were the pictures of the first lesbian or gay couples who had got married, their words, in the county. And suddenly, it wasn't them up there in Dublin. And that, I think, is what led us to 42 out of 43 constituencies voting yes, and only 1,000 votes missing in Roscommon. And I think that kind of courage that people took, because it was difficult in those days to stand up as a lesbian couple in Roscommon and say we're having a civil partnership and be a picture in the paper. Look, that's hard. Sheehan and Sarah talked in that little video how hard it is in Longford. And I think that's the kind of courage that we now need to fight the discrimination that's happening to trans people, the rise in hostility and violence towards migrants, towards people of colour, and the demolition of our democracy and the rule of law. Sorry, your question.
So what was happening with...
Sorry, Anna.
This will happen a lot.
What was happening?
I'll shut up now.
What was happening with the Yes Equality campaign? A couple of organisations decided to get together. So talk to us
I'll do
about
that very quickly. In essence, so the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, Marriage Equality and Gay and Lesbian Equality, and we're working to exactly the same goal in slightly different strategies for a number of years and linked in a bit, tentatively. And then the Constitutional Convention came around and it was very clear there was no option anymore. We're either going to win this or we're not. And I think we had discussions and we would be forgiven reasonably enough and maybe if we fought a brilliant fight but didn't win. We would never be forgiven and shouldn't ever have been forgiven if we fought parallel things without any joined up writing and we lost. That was just unquestionable. And in that spirit, we all came together. You might call that kind of necessity, mother invention and all those kind of things, but it worked. So we went into the Constitutional Convention, we worked out how we'd use the little bitine of a slot we had, and Claire and Connor were the stars of the show as children of lesbian and gay parents, and you know, defeated the bishops with their "yous are all a bit odd" stuff, you know. And Claire's great one is I'm going to be a doctor, and my future boyfriend, and they didn't get it. They thought she should be a lesbian. You know, it was just bizarre. So that worked, and then we realized, okay, look, we're at senior hurling now. We came together again, that was in 2013, and we had been talking. In 2014, there was the Register to Vote, and if you remember, that was a fabulous campaign. Adam May, who's the other genius behind the referendum, who designed everything, including all of that. Actually, minuscule, sorry. We had, I will shut up. We're in a room in the ICCL's office. We had sent out a pitch for who's going to design it. What are we? Who are we? What do we look like? And we had this long, complicated language of the campaign for the whatever, like, you know, bore me. But Adam came in as to present, and he just put up this colours and called us Yes Equality, and we all went, oh yeah, that's it. Yeah. And it was just done, and that's what it became. So that Register to Vote was the first outing for that. It was brilliant. And then we had a really difficult January. Noel Whelan had done How to Win a Referendum meetings in Dublin around the country with us. And Noel was brilliant because he says, you think you're winning, do you? Well, let me tell you something. And it was the most sobering moments because he listed every referendum. Catherine knows this. He listed every referendum that had been lost and why it had been lost. And he was steeped in this knowledge. So like, we were really scared going into this. And in the January of 2015, we were all working to get the Children and Family Relationships Act passed because we knew that was the Achilles heel of the referendum. So we worked very hard on lobbying for that, all of us. We worked, supported trans organisations on gender recognition, which was pulling through as well, and which was another great outcome from 2015. And in the end, ended up, which Marie Hamilton found an office in Clarendon Street, and we ended up in there going, now what? That led us to next steps. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I love all the small stories, actually. They're just incredible. Anna, that time period, 2013 to 2015, am I right in saying you felt my work is done? You had been doing work years previously to that with LGBT Noise.
I don't know if I felt my work was done, Anna. I think I was completely burnt out from the previous number of years of intense activism from about, I think, 2006, 2007 up until I think it was 2014. It was a crazy time, and I think I've needed the last 10 years to kind of recover, to be honest. But yeah, it was.
Can you explain a little bit about LGBT Noise and what was happening with you?
I can, yeah. So I've been, well, I suppose many stories begin with, I grew up in rural Ireland, but I did grow up in rural Ireland, and you know, there was nobody in Tralee, County Kerry who was out, and no visibility, no representation, no semblance of community, until I went to UCC and helped to, I suppose, reignite the LGBT society as it was back then there. And I suppose, you know, over my time there working with the society, you know, we changed things on campus, and we established a presence on campus, and we, you know, brought people out to the society, and people felt they could be visible on campus, and that wasn't something that, you know, happened all that often. It was very, you know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and, you know, as everybody knows, Ireland was incredibly repressed and also very repressive. And then, you know, after, you know, those few years of student activism and really, I suppose, implementing change in small little campus in UCC, I moved to Dublin. And I guess my perception was that, you know, there was a lot of, you know, advocacy taking place in the corridors of power and in the back rooms and in the offices, but you never really saw any presence of the community on the streets. You know, the only kind of representation you saw of the community was the bars, and even then they were kind of not cloaked, but they sort of, you know, maybe around Pride there might have been, you know, a poster put up, but that was kind of it. There wasn't any visible presence of the community. People, you wouldn't see couples holding hands on the streets. You wouldn't see, you know, anytime there was a newspaper article about rights or the community or whatever legislative process was ongoing, it was always a stock image, and you never saw like what a real actual gay looked like. So then when, I think it was around 2006, there was a number of activists who kind of got very frustrated with the party process, and they had been working within the parties, but just the snail's pace progress. And so they decided, okay, well, you know, we're going to take a different tack. And I you know, fell in with these activists. I fell in with a bad crowd. And I realized that, you know, I had been reading about these, you know, these changes, and, you know, politicians in newspapers saying, oh yeah, no, they don't want civil partnership, or they don't want relationship recognition, and or, you know, you might, you know, I mean, pick your newspaper. There was somebody weekly with a column from the other side who would, you know, put their views out to the public. And I didn't want to sit at home anymore. I wanted to have an impact, and everybody else in Noise wanted to have an impact too. So there was only ever about 7 or 8 of us at any one time in the group, and we wanted to create a presence. We wanted to create visibility on the streets of Dublin. We wanted people to be able to see what we looked like. They wanted them to hear us, and they certainly heard us, as the name goes. But what we wanted to do was create a vibrancy in that representation, in that visibility. We wanted to create really fun events, protests. So, you know, there's not a lot of protests you can say are fun, right? And in most cases, rightly so. But, you know, we had Sing for Civil Marriage, and we had kiss-ins for civil marriage, and we had, you know, big comedic heads of politicians wearing protests, and you know, we travelled the length and breadth of the country, you know, giving talks to student societies, talking at Pride. We gave presentations on rights. We did a lot of community outreach. We built networks with, you know, many other organisations who were, you know, trying to do this work. And we wanted to, I suppose, do 3 things. We wanted to engage with the community. We wanted to educate the community. We wanted to empower the community. And as we started doing our engagement and our education, you know, we were like, okay, well, where are we going to find the gays? You know, social media was pretty nascent at that stage, and I was working in Google at the time, and I was like, well, you know, why don't we do, you know, viral videos? You know, at the time I was like, oh, viral video, yeah, let's do that. And so, you know, we engaged that way, but really, like, actually finding gays, apart from a blog, which were, you know, all the rage back then, you had to find them in the bars. So we would go out with our leaflets and flyer in the bars and in the clubs of a Saturday night, and you were finding yourself in really surreal situations where you'd be trying to explain to people, yeah, this is the difference between religious marriage and civil marriage, and Colin Minogue is like banging away in the background. And, you know, we got a lot of interesting responses, and some of them were like, oh, well, you never changed the Catholic Church. We're like, well, no, we're not trying to change the Catholic Church. You know, people's perception of marriage was always, oh, well, it takes place in a church. And there's, you know, we're like, no, there is a thing called civil marriage that has nothing to do with religion. And people weren't aware of this. So, you know, we handing out our flyers and ultimately, you know, trying to explain the difference between civil partnership and civil marriage. And, you know, what we found was that people were, you know, either not interested in it, or they said, you know, there was a sentiment of, don't rock the boat, stop drawing attention to us, you're causing trouble, why are you doing this? And, you know, there was an element of people who just weren't interested, but didn't see it from an equality perspective, an equal rights perspective, civil rights perspective. And that was challenging. And I think looking back on it, I think at the time we probably thought, oh, you know, it's an apathy towards, you know, political engagement or, you know, civil rights. But really, I think what it was, we were dealing with obviously successive generations that were raised in a homophobic society, and they were raised to believe that they were not entitled to equal rights, that they did not have the confidence to say, I am deserving of equal rights. They felt that, and it's a massive generalization, of course, there were activists out there who, you know, before us who were out and proud, but the average, you know, if you could say the average gay on the street or the average gay in the club, you know, there was a distinct lack of confidence in the community. There was a fear, you know, so many people weren't out in their jobs, they weren't out in their schools, in colleges. So what we tried to do was, I suppose, empower people to develop that confidence and explain to people, you know, you are deserving of equal rights. Why aren't you? You know, and try and bring people along on that journey. And in doing that, we created a lot of noise, and we were, you know, I think, just constantly, you know, setting that North Star of, not that marriage was a great institution or anything like that. It's the North Star right now in terms of civil rights. This is where we need to get to. This is what we need to keep pushing for. And obviously, you know, there was the incremental changes, but, you know, we were obviously, we were very privileged in the sense that we wanted to be in a position to criticize the government, be in a position to call out the homophobes who had the, you know, articles in the weekly newspapers. We wanted to be able to poke fun at them. We didn't want to have to overthink what we were saying too much. We wanted to get, you know, obviously cogent points across, but we wanted to do it in a fun, engaging way and not be held back by any kind of internalized homophobia, really, which was, you know, not saying that everybody was held back by that, but there was just that sense that we wanted to build the community's confidence and not engage in respectability politics. And, you know, there was a place for that, but we weren't that. It was an amazing time, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of that we did as well, we brought along, I suppose, all of the other issues that the community were facing when we held marches and we held protests. We talked about, you know, we talked about trans rights, we talked about the blood ban, we talked about Section 37, we talked about travellers' rights, and we had, you know, people from the community come and talk about those topics, you know, at our events, and the community learned about them and were educated about those. And I think, you know, we had thousands of people up and down the country who, you know, when the time came, were educated and well versed in their own in these issues, and it was really, I think, Noise, I think, in terms of legacy, did two things. Excuse me. I think we were able to change the narrative. I think that, you know, there was, you know, when civil partnership was passed, and you know, it was what, 2010. We had been working away for those previous few years. We had been pushing for our North Star, and we had been putting articles in the paper. We had been doing media interviews. We had been on the streets. We had been getting, you know, instead of the stock images with the cake toppers and the disembodied hands, it was, you know, pictures of us with bright placards and pictures of, you know, real people and real couples on the streets and, you know, funny slogans. You know, we you know, and various other things like tearing up the civil partnership bill and such, and sorry, and not sorry, you know, along with lots of other people, you know, we managed to push the narrative forward that we were constantly saying that this is the North Star, this is where we need to be, this is not good enough because we are deserving of equal rights. And that is why, and for many other reasons too, that it was a very short period between civil partnership and the referendum happening. So, you know, educating all of those people, having, you know, I'm thinking about when Pantygate happened. You might remember Pantygate with RTE. You know, we had the ability to, you know, put the call out for people to assemble, and there'd be hundreds of people assembled for a protest within, you know, a day. And that meant that the issue was kept in the media, that RTE had to come and cover it. And, you know, that was, it was keeping those images and keeping that drive forward. You know, there wasn't, you know, because I remember when I was growing up, you know, you might see a picture of the Dublin Pride Parade, you know, one picture a year in the Irish Times. That was community representation. And that was really what we wanted to change. So I think changing the narrative and educating people and empowering people and giving people the confidence to get out and fight for their rights, so that you had a huge cohort of people who were ready to go and canvass when the time came. And we had an awful lot of fun along the way.
Even though you're exhausted afterwards.
Exhausted.
It took you 10 years.
It really did, honestly, yeah.
Yeah. Carl, you decided the best work you could do was to record and archive throughout that period. Tell us about that.
I don't have the skill set that these guys have in terms of campaigning and political nuance and all that kind of thing. But I thought one of the things I've always been interested in is our history. Because it's too easily lost, and we forget where we've come from, we forget the individuals who made personal sacrifices to get us to where we are. And I've always been interested in keeping some kind of record of that. So I had been kind of following along with different events that were happening. Marriage Equality had organised the Children Conference just down the road from here, and the minister at the time came in, Alan Shatter, for it and things like that. And that was kind of considered to be something big. And you know, NXF had organised, as part of the surveys that had been done, the burning issues surveys, stuff around families issues and things like that. And there was, I remember they brought over an expert from, I think it was the Netherlands, who was talking about different types of headed families. Like, you know, it wasn't just heterosexual family, it was same-sex family, and then there was multiple families, like where there was 3 parents, 4 parents kind of thing. And then they were talking about at the time, you know, having grandparents considered to have the same access as parents. And there was all these wonderful things that were happening, and I was thinking, God, will we ever get to that in this country at all? And actually, just one other thing I remember, it's often useful to have a camera. One of the things I learned many years ago was that if you have a lanyard and a camera, you can walk up to any security barrier and they'll let you straight through. So one of the great things was, Belong To, I think it was, had organised a conference in Wood Quay about parenting. And a certain deputy from next door had organised a few people, one of them being the mother of that teacher who stands outside the school, whose name I shall not say, but they all came along and they were protesting, and it was really horrible. You know, what they did was, and the things they were saying and what they had in their placards and all the rest was horrible, and they were really upsetting the parents, because the parents some of them had their children with them, and they didn't want them going out there and seeing this kind of thing. And Meninia was involved in the organisation, and she was saying, "What are we going to do? They're not going to go away." And I said, I have an idea. So I picked up my camera, I went outside. I didn't film them, but I pointed the camera at them a few times. I went back and forward. And then when I put the camera away, they went, "Job done, we're off now," and off they went. Because they thought they got what they wanted, which was coverage. And I think Meninia actually wrote it in the book about the experience of that happening from Marriage Equality. But anyway, all these things were happening. I thought it was important that nothing ever just happens. There's a process that gets you to that point. And I think it's very important that we keep a record of all those little steps along the way. I enjoyed going out and filming at LGBT Noise. They were energetic events. I was more used to the Glen stuff where it was kind of a conference somewhere and there was ministers coming in to talk, and I was quietly at the back of the room. I understand what it's like for the cameraman who's there at the back of the room right now, because I did that job many times. And so you're trying not to get in the way, but you're just trying to capture the whole thing and keep a record of it so that it's there for the future. So we understand step one, step two, well, sometimes you miss step one because they happen quietly usually, but by the time the momentum starts to build, you become aware of it and you start collecting the stuff. And it's really good to look back at it and see how old we've all become. I was standing outside earlier on and people were coming up and saying hello to me, and I was having to think twice about, who is this? Particularly Max. I didn't recognize Max with hair. And Anna, when I saw Anna, I said, Anna, you have hair, my God. I think I'm the only one who has never let their hair grow, but anyway. But yeah, that was it. And so, like, you know, this collection that Paul, these photographs that Paul took, I knew Paul from before the campaign because Glenn had commissioned him a few times to take photographs and things like that. And so I kind of knew his face. It was great that he was there as a professional taking all the photographs that he was taking, because you can see what an important record it is. And so the value of these things is immense. Now, can I just say at this point, because I may not get a chance to say it later, that what you see in Paul's collection, although it's 1,000 images, it is that much of what we actually have as a digital archive. And we desperately need to find a home for it. And I'm not putting pressure on NLI because I know you guys have limited resources and the things that you can do, but we do need to find somewhere to put it, because I am sick and tired of standing, you know, of knocking over drives and making sure that the drive is still working, and maybe buying a new drive to transfer a thing over just in case that drive fails, kind of thing. And anybody who works in digital knows how important it is to do all that stuff. So we do need to find a home for the full story, because it's all there. One of the things that Brian and Grania commissioned after the campaign was for myself and a couple of other people. I see Crooker sitting over there who worked with me on it as well. We went around the country and we interviewed 113 of the local activists who were involved around the country on the ground doing the campaigns about their experiences. And that archive is incredibly important, and we can't lose it. We need to find a way of preserving that.
And what was it like speaking to those people?
It was actually quite, I'm sure Cara will echo this, it was very emotional at times, because people put their heart and soul into the campaign, and it was so obvious when you got them talking. And there were times, sorry, I've got to take a sip of water here, else I go dry. There were times we were very conscious of the fact that this was an emotional experience for people. And so we needed to be careful that when you bring people to that high point of their emotion, that you don't just leave them, drop them, and then just walk away. So we had to have a process to bring them up and then bring them back down again, kind of thing. But the stories they told, like we all know the big stories about the campaign. There's books being written about it, and they're out there. But the small stories that people told, like remember Will down in Roscommon. Will was the activist he was a gay farmer. The results came out on the Saturday, and he realised that Roscommon was the only county, Roscommon, Leitrim, South Leitrim, was the only district that didn't vote for it. He was devastated, absolutely devastated. And when we interviewed him afterwards, and he talked about that, the emotion that came out of him, and he felt guilty. He felt bad that his campaign was the only one, as he saw it, that didn't win. And so he took that very personally, and I think even to this day it still kind of has an effect on him and that. So we were allowed into that very private and sensitive area with people to talk to them about it. And it's an aspect of the campaign, because obviously we look at the fabulous pictures that are here, and you see the joy, particularly that one was in the hotel where we had the campaign. All the volunteers came to Ballsbridge Hotel, and we were there, and we had different ministers coming in during the day, getting up and saying things, and Mary Achilles came in at one stage. Brian and Grania went off to Dublin Castle for the results and that. So when the result, we had it live on the screen, and when the result came out, that place just went into uproar. The energy was just incredible. Paul, all I could see was Paul darting around the place trying to get all the different pictures, because he has a great eye for storytelling in his pictures, and he knew what to look for in order to tell us. So that picture that does come up every so often, you see how it captures the energy that was in the room. And that was, and obviously there was people around in other parts who were bawling their eyes out. And the one thing I kept, we had, do you remember we had the campaign song, Just Say Yes? And it was, who got it? Was it Snow Patrol? Yeah, but Yvonne Judge had worked her magic, and she got permission for us to use it for the campaign. And Noel Whelan really fell in love with the song. And by this stage, you're sick and tired of hearing the song. Like how many, particularly when you're doing video, like the team of guys that I was working with, Stu and Crowher and Shane, we were like producing videos every day, 2 or 3 videos a day with the same track. And when you're editing, I don't know if you know this, but if you're editing to music, you have to keep going back and go down, and then you go back and you go, and then you go back. And so we're sick and tired of it. But anyway, Noel Whelan on the day in the hotel.
We'll talk about the day in a little
sorry,
bit.
okay.
Yeah,
I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'll come back to you about that. But Brian, I want to talk to you about the couple of weeks leading up to the vote, and I suppose to get a sense of what was happening, you know, in Yes Equality HQ.
The first thing is, Karl Hayden says he's not a campaigner. I think you see an extraordinary campaigner there. Like, he deserves his own show, and we'll have to arrange that sometime. Are those here who worked in that room? Like, we had this minuscule room because we no money, and Gráinne used to always say, "We get to the credit union, we'll be grand." And people like Denise, Charlton, and her Highland sister Lisa, and Suzanne from the ICCL, and others, just kind of, got money. And, Kathleen Hunt, I don't know where the money it came in. Like, and we used to do things like, will we order another 10,000 posters? Norla Howard was managing the posters. Like, yeah. And we'd no money to pay for them. So there was all that kind of stuff. There was no money. Thankfully, the no posters were shite and went up early, right? And we said, Craig and Alan and all the others from the social media team said, let's go out and, don't get angry, donate, right? We got 24,000 in 24 hours, right? And Orla Howard goes, Grant, another batch of posters. Like, it was that kind of, the line was always, we had these meetings at 8:30 in the morning. People like Andrew had been in since 7. There was a briefing book ready for the meeting. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the briefing book was sent out to maybe 400 people in the end. Politicians, Yes Equality groups, allied groups, people like the trade unions and everybody else were fantastic. The other LGBT organisations. And they got a message book at 9 o'clock every morning, which said, here's what's coming up today, here's what's in the papers, here's what our answer is, stick with the line, right? And it was brilliant, right? And there was a meeting at 8:30, everyone was there, like there was heads of departments, Davin was running the business crowd, Meninia was on the bus, or she or Mary would be there, Sandra was looking after the 70 SE Cult group. So the stuff, Patrick was running a distribution centre, like he'd never done in his life, and suddenly there's a shop and a distribution centre and everything. And it was that kind of fabulous environment where people who had zero experience in something were suddenly told, Grant, done. And Noel had the thing, we want every idea. If it can't be done in 48 hours, not interested. And we came to the last day, because the last message is really tricky, because it's like, what do you say to people who are undecided? And we knew there was a significant chunk undecided. And have asked this company who had worked with us, and they came up with a thing, you can let me vote. It was the only time we ever asked people for a vote. It was a really difficult one, and we did a steering group, and we were back and forth. And it became, okay, this has to be done in 24 hours, right? And Alan came and found people, because they had to pose with their own photographs. It's a beautiful photographer in a garden, someone's Hadassah's garden, and they were that was what happened. There was a pace that was phenomenal, and there was meetings every night. There was a different provinces. Yes, equality groups came together. all the allied groups came together on a Tuesday evening. The Dublin groups came on a Wednesday evening. It was just this whirlwind of action. And all the time, there was more and more people coming forward. Vivian Cummins was here. Vivian, I have to tell this about Vivian. Jan McDonough came. She was free for a day or two, and suddenly she's there 8 days a week, right? And running the media with Andrew. Vivian is in the room somewhere.
She's there.
There she is. So Vivian, Seamus Dooley had come and joined us. He was on the board of Glen, NUJ, and we had nobody to deal with regional media. And he's like, I know someone, Vivian Clark did. And Vivian had edited regional newspapers, knew everyone who ever lived in a regional newspaper or a regional radio station. And Grania and I met her, and she said, yeah, I could work. We said, look, we have much money, but like we could probably pay for like 3 days a week or something like that. And she said, leave with me, I'll come back to you tomorrow. And tomorrow she came back and said, yeah, like if you can give me 200 quid, that'll kind of match up my mortgage and I'll do it. And we thought, 200 quid a day? That's fantastic. It was 200 quid for the 3 days. She worked for 3 days and then she worked for 7 days a week for the same money. And it was that, people who volunteered, Fergal came in, people turned up and worked and sat at a quarter. We started off at a desk, half a desk, quarter of a desk. And then we literally would have had about 6 people in this little. And that was it. And it was that. And then there were people. And two I want to mention. The badges turned out to be, I don't know, whoever knew that everyone wanted badges. And as Grania says, like people were going around like, flashing. And then they became a proud symbol to wear. So we were always trying to create something for the media, two short stories. And we had the 500,000 badge. It might have been 402,000, but it was the 500,000 badge. And Grog and I were wandering out in our finery up and down Grafton Street, handing people out badges, a little bowl, and the cameras were there, Paul was there, and saying, would you like a badge? And making an instant assessment, nah, they wouldn't do for the Irish Times, right? In that utterly subjective judgment. And I came up on this man, and his name was William Sheehan, but no relation. And I said to him, would you like a badge? And he said, oh, I'd be really delighted to take a badge. And I thought, I said, would you like to take the 500,000? Put that back. Would you like to take the 500,000 badge and be photographed by the Irish Times? He said, I would be honoured to do so. He was 82. Yeah. He was from Skibbereen. He lived in Windy Arbor all his life. He had, not the cleanest jacket you ever saw, and a hat. Pulled himself together. He had kind of soft, slippery shoes on, and he came over and he was delighted to take that. Now, somewhere, somehow or other, his children made contact with Grania or me afterwards. And then one of the stories that moves me every time, we Home to Vote and Boat to Vote. Actually, Home to Vote were hilarious. There was, I hope nobody from certain organisations here, they were always accusing us of, fake voting and all the rest. And this lovely young woman had come back from Australia. And of course, the law is, if you have been out of the country but are intending to return within about, a year was the kind of not in that, then you could vote, otherwise you couldn't, right? So this woman, do you remember her? She turns up and Karl and the team were like anyone, more video.
Filmer.
So this, I don't remember her name, she was filmed, she said, oh yeah, it's great, I've been in Australia 4 years, and we both went, oh no, shut up. So she refilmed. She
went on the edit floor very quickly.
Yeah. But the Home to Vote and the Boat to Vote are wonderful, and like you're right, Twitter was a lovely thing in those days, and the Boat to Vote people, they left Houston and they were traveling. We all remember those train carriages and that. And as the boat came in, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon of voting day. The ferry came in. Day before.
The Thursday. Yeah.
It was the moment I knew we had won. Yeah. I didn't know until then. As it sailed into Dublin Bay, Anna MacCarthy got up and she sang She Moved Through the Fair. And it will not be long, love, till our wedding day. And it was beautiful. And we all just fell apart, I really did there. But it's that kind of stuff was incredible. Magic. And it was people, it was parents, it was, work colleagues, it was, everything. Catherine, I remember you were up in PwC or somebody like that, who were trying to figure out how could they say we're for marriage, but we couldn't say it. So they asked Catherine and Louise to come up. It was that kind of, way that people from everywhere, from all walks of life, try to make spaces to allow people's better selves come out.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm conscious of time, and I know it's all fantastic.
You don't want to go home yet, do you?
Could be here all night.
Don't ask him anymore.
Done.
What I would like to do is throw it out to the audience. If anybody has any questions. Oh, an arm is up already. Yes. There's a little mic coming over to you there.
My name's Caroline Early. I was in LGBT Noise with Anna, as was Alison and Max beside me, and there might be a few more of us around the place. I know Anna touched upon it a tiny bit, but I think it might be important to elaborate on the marches we had, the annual March for Marriage, which, and we were talking about the ordinary gay in the clubs, the ordinary gays. It brought the ordinary gays onto the streets. People weren't used to campaigning. We weren't used to being visible. And I think it is a really important part of the story of how marriage equality was won. Because yes, we had people joining the Yes Equality campaign, but a lot of those people were first on the streets at the annual March for Marriage organised by LGBT Noise. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and I don't know if Anna wants to expand on it. And the other thing, I know Anna said it in jest and apologised and then took back her apology very quickly, was when she ripped up the Civil Partnership Bill. And not to take away from the work that was done to get that, the Civil Partnership Bill, but I think it was a really seminal moment in the history of LGBTQ rights in Ireland when Anna ripped that up at Pride, because it was the moment where we realised we're not just going to settle for the crumbs off the table, that we want to be equal to everybody else. And it was when the conversations really started on the ground, in the bars, with the ordinary gays, that we actually deserved a whole lot, not just civil partnership. So it was a really, really important moment, even though it was a controversial moment and not a very popular moment among some quarters. But in retrospect, I think, I don't know where it can be acknowledged or how it can be acknowledged. Maybe it's just going to be here today, but I think it should be acknowledged as being a really important moment in our history when Anna did that. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, someone Eddie?
Ian McGahan is my name. I remember when Brian and Andrew came out to meet myself and William and Sam and said, we want you to start a network in Bray. And actually, we said, yes, we'll work on that. And we went away, and three of us, and everyone else was like, no, we can't just do Bray, we have to do the whole county. So actually, the campaign itself did grow a lot of legs, but I've just been looking a lot over the last month or two at the Facebook groups that we had locally, and I've forgotten a lot of the stuff. And I know that you were saying about people who literally gave up their whole lives. I think for about 10 weeks, I was working almost 2 full-time jobs running the campaign locally. And I think the head office, the business campaign, I was like, no, you're giving me too much work already. So I think it would be really important. Karl talked about his digital archive, because I know Karl interviewed me, but I've forgotten what I said to Karl at the time.
I haven't, Dean.
And and I know that we also had done our own interviews of a lot of people involved in the campaign in Wicklow, which the people who did that handed that over to Karl. So I think it's actually really important to record what happened in the local campaigns. And just to also say, on the ground, we canvassed particular areas of Wicklow really, really heavily. There were areas that didn't get canvassed and the vote was lower. So the groundwork really, really did matter.
Thank you for that.
Can I just, on the back of that, just say that when we began the process of handing over the archive, at first I thought we were given the whole archive, and I was thinking, yes, my God. And then decisions had to be made. Sandra was director of the National Library at the time, decision due to funding. It's horrible to think that our National Library is so underfunded, but anyway. That due to funding, that they could only take a certain aspect of it. Now, they had gone through the archive, they figured that Paul's photographs would be the ones that would stand, I think, the best in terms of representing the digital campaign and that. But the work that was done by the team who were sitting back over there, and the joy it was to come in, I think Brian will agree with me on this, the joy it was to come in and to be received with such warmth with such enthusiasm, the professionalism of all the people who were here working with us, who guided us through it. And you must remember it was the first time for them as well to take in a digital archive, so they were breaking new ground for themselves as well. They chose 3 digital archives around the same time to work with. So the whole process was a learning experience for us all. But every step along the way, they were there guiding us, helping us, explaining everything in great detail about why it was done this way, what was needed, including me then getting a questionnaire, detailed questionnaire about the drives that I was giving them. Has it ever been attached to the internet? Did you ever do this? Because of the security aspect of it in that as well. But I just want to pay tribute to them because we're here in your home. You guys work, this is your passion, what you do. Extremely grateful that you chose us to be one of the 3 projects that you took on, and the way that you did it was just absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much indeed to you all.
We're nearing the end of this. I just want to come back to the panel, each one of you, to kind of 10 years on, to reflect on where we are now. And as I said the other evening or the other day at the LGBT Ireland event, you know, the LGBTQ plus community is not homogenous. It's a diverse and complex community. And today, with the anti-trans movement growing and seeing what is happening in places like Hungary, the UK, and in the States as well, and here, what can we take from the success of the referendum to be allies to those within the LGBTQ community who are most at risk? So, and I'm going to start with you.
Sure, yeah, it's a tricky one. I suppose like what we learned from the campaign was really the humanizing people behind the issues is so important. Putting faces to the issues, but at the same time, it's a huge burden on people to have to get out there and tell their stories. So it's important to acknowledge that and talk about the impact on people. I think being allies, solidarity, making alliances, it's pretty clear that I mean, if we look at the situation in the UK, for instance, where lesbian and gay rights were very much lesbian and gay rights for many years, and kind of anyone who wasn't within that category was kind of marginalized and left behind in the campaigns that around relationship recognition in particular. And we can see the splintering now in UK feminism, and we didn't have that here. We had very much feminism and LGBT rights were interlinked and so much overlap, and from after the marriage campaign, people working on repeal, and it's great to see that we are, we don't have that splintering, but we have to be, I suppose, aware that there are, forces who are trying to create that split. I think one of the things that we didn't really have during the campaign necessarily, that we are seeing now is, I suppose, the change in the online environment and the influence that, mis and disinformation is bringing. I mean, we always had mis and disinformation. It was just called something else, but it was in your, it was in, mainstream media. And now it's, in sort of people's siloed experiences on social media, and countering that is very difficult, going to be very difficult. I don't have an answer for that one, but calling it out as a concern. I suppose, on the whole, just people standing up, speaking out. If it doesn't affect you directly, think about standing up, showing solidarity. For people who are directly affected, practice self-care. Angela Davis famously talked about self-care being a radical act. And I suppose too, it's important to acknowledge that there's peaks and troughs in terms of activism and in terms of social progress, and we're very much, I think, in a trough, or and who knows how long we'll be in that trough. We're experiencing a backlash now after like so many years of progress, amazing progress, and it seems to be happening certainly globally. I think that we have to remember that progress is not linear, but as they say, the arc of the universe bends towards justice, and we just have to make sure that that arc and that bend is bent quicker than it might necessarily be. So yeah, I mean, a lot done, And, you know, I suppose for me, you know, thinking about the burnout from the campaigns, the self-care piece is just, it's a big one.
Yeah, thank you for that. Karl, have you any thoughts?
Just that, you know, we came together, we were able to bring people together to work for a common goal. We put aside our differences in terms of how we got there to that point. We did it before, we can do it now. It's very important that we do it now. I look around and I see sometimes the people who I thought we could rely on in the past are faltering. They're not as confident in coming forward and being vocal in support of the things that they need to be supportive of. And we need to keep that, we need to keep pushing that to make sure that they keep on side with us in that. Don't lose sight of the goals. It's going to be hard, but we've done it before, and I believe that we can do it again.
Yeah. Brian, final thought from you?
In brief.
Yes.
2 stories first, though.
I think we're in trouble. I think we're in serious trouble. I think, would anybody here take a bet that Marine Le Pen, Farage and AFD won't be in office in the visible future? I absolutely hear what Anna talks about, minding ourselves for the struggles ahead. But in that old misery vision, I think the thing we have to remember from the referendum is that people are decent. People can be decent. And we see it in every survey. People say 82% of people support trans access to healthcare. Like we know this. And that's what we have to find. And I go back to what I said about Audrey at the beginning. Courage is catching. We need to ensure that we stand up. Every little, like every conversation that was had at every dinner table, askance even in the years leading up to and during the referendum mattered. Every little conversation we can have now matters. And one little example of it, one story. A person who shall not be named who thinks he wants to be President of Ireland said that he was going to send the army into Carrickmacross because people of African origin were rude, but it doesn't matter. And Oliver Callan wrote a really brilliant piece in the Independent recently, and it's worth reading, because that piece about courage that matters. So it basically, because he's from Carrickmacross, he totally slagged the place off, right? And he did beautifully and say that people are not that. It was all lies, but people are better than that. And it's that kind of thing. Those who have voices like him have to be out there saying it. We're done with staying quiet. It goes back to what you were talking about in noise. We're done. It's over. The time when we can rest in our privilege, and that's too contentious word, but we can rest in our safety, is probably better, is over. That doesn't mean we all have to man the barricades or do it, but it does mean we have to have courage in every instance in our day to call out the conversation at work, to say in families, actually, you can't say that in my house, you can believe it, you can. Those little things change the dynamic, not in a way that pillories people, but in a way that, as we did in the referendum, we created spaces for people to come and explore stuff in a positive environment. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Brian, Anna, and Karl. Thank you all.